So let's call ourselves to order at 18 minutes past the hour.
Right on time.
Folks,
This
so
is odd, but I guess it's getting to know Zoom. Every time we use it, we learn something new about it. I don't even know where you came up with the new password, but thank you very much. For those of you who have joined us, my name is Asa Marie Davis, and I'm the president of the Southern Nevada chapter of the American Society of Safety Professionals. Lord, I'm going back. We have a wonderful guest speaker with us today, speaking about hearing conservation. His name is Fred Snyder, and he's the owner and operator of Sound Management, one of the largest hearing testing and sound evaluation companies here in the Nevada area. And if you looked, signed on earlier, you heard us talking about he goes to Laughlin. He also goes up to Elko and basically services Nevada in a wonderful way as a company. The company that I work for actually uses him as well. So without further ado, and we put him off for 20 minutes now because of our own glitches. So I wanted to go ahead and introduce Fred Snyder and Sam Liebarger, our programming person, will assist with the PowerPoint. And I hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you for joining us.
The bad news is Fred didn't get us any PowerPoint, so he's on his own.
Yes.
No. The good news, let's say the good news is we're not being married to boring slides. We get to see Fred's handsome face anyway. That's the good news.
Exactly. And Fred
Okay,
is such a wealth of information that will not be a problem for him.
Something you forgot to say about Fred is he's been in business for over 20 years doing sound protection, the sound management company. So they're not a fly-by-night, and they have a track record, and I've used them several times in different consulting capacities, and they bailed me out of a couple court cases.
More great information about you, Fred.
Yes, I appreciate that. Well, good morning, everyone. I see Dwayne down there. Welcome, sir. Good to see you. And we'll probably talk a little bit later when we get into the question and answer. And then as Russell was saying, I didn't give him any slides. I looked at some previous presentations that we had given around town, and I thought about it. I said, we're dealing with safety engineers here, so these guys are pretty learned. So to bore them with the ABCs of hearing conservation, I didn't think would be fruitful. So what I would like to do is just to do a crosstalk. I want to talk to you about some the specific areas of hearing conservation, but at the same time, I do want this to be interactive in that you're able to share some of your experiences and maybe some challenges that you may be having, and that we can do some cross-talking and trade off some information. I think that would be a bit more fruitful than running through a bunch of slides that is old hat for you. So hopefully everyone's okay with that. I want to start off this morning just primarily to say that, and this isn't news to any of you guys, but we are a safety community. Jason mentioned his Justice League. Pretty much we are the superheroes out there. We are the core skilled workers out here that are saving the health and safety of our population that we are purposely putting in harm's way. In this case, hazardous noise. We're putting them in harm's way, and in a lot of cases, they don't know that they're actually harming themselves to the degree that we know it. So I like to say that safety is a team sport, and we are the players and coaches. So some of us are safety managers, some of us are safety engineers, and deal more with an oversight of the programs, but we all have a vested interest in and buy-in into preventing any occupational illness or injury to our colleagues and coworkers. So the first thing I wanted to do is to get into the surveillance and noise exposure monitoring. Of course, you guys should be familiar with the OSHA regulation standards, 29 CFR 191095, and another one is 1904.10, and that is the record keeping or some straightforward guidance on how to handle people with OSHA recordable hearing loss. Again, with the surveillance, when I speak of surveillance, I'm talking more so of us guys walking around, just doing normal business in our workplaces. And at the same time we're doing that, we're actually inherently, for most of us, we're looking for any safety issues that may be not obvious to the layperson. So with surveillance, that's a constant ongoing process for us. It's not something we would do as a baseline. Of course, we do our baseline walkthroughs of our workplaces. And for that matter, it's not only those obvious areas, noisy plant areas and such. It's also the areas that we don't think are obviously going to be hazardous noise areas. So one of the things you'll hear me say throughout our talk is communicate. It's communication with our team members, whether it's up the food chain, our bosses, or those guys that are actually in earshot, if you will, of the noise. Communication creates a buy-in into your hearing conservation program. So as managers, I say we must have an ear to hear. That means we're observant of any potential hazardous noise that may or not be presented to you by those folks working out on the floor. So we are the spies, the private eyes that are actually picking up on those things that aren't naturally seen by the layperson. Dwayne, you're leaning in. Did you have something? Or are you just getting closer? Okay. So I like to say we want to keep our eyes on the prize, and that prize is always our most valuable resource, which is our employees or team members. So sometimes they're not watching out for themselves. They're doing what they do. Some old school guys are, you know, hazardous noise is something that kind of comes with the program, and they don't necessarily generally abide by the safety guidelines. So I like to say, for us as safety managers, safety engineers, we are to identify those potential hazardous areas and again communicate with our employees, both up the chain, our bosses. We need the buy-in from our bosses, correct? In the military, we call it the top cover, right? We need our bosses to be able to buy off and then endorse what we're going to be doing implementation-wise with these programs. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're communicating with those folks within the, whether it's a plant area or some other type of industrial, or maybe even a hotel casino type environment, entertainment and such. We want to be able to communicate with them on the front end what we're working toward in terms of identifying an area and taking the appropriate actions, such as implementing a hearing conservation program. As far as the hearing conservation program, what are we looking for when we're observing or surveilling? We're listening with our natural ear for any areas that we may walk into or walk by that may sound loud, simply speaking. Another way that we can get into whether or not this area is an area that we need to delve deeper into to see if it's in fact a hazardous area is the use of an area noise meter. So you guys are all familiar with I call it the wand. And preliminarily, you can use that type of a device to do a sampling, be it 5-10 minutes of sampling an area to see if you're getting an 85 decibel or higher reading during that time frame. Another nice tool is the NIOSH noise meter, which you can use on your phone. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that NIOSH sound meter. I don't know if it's on Android. I have an iPhone. I know it's the app is for iPhone. I don't know if we have one for Android yet. You guys may know. That's a nice tool that we all always have our cell phones with us. So you're walking by an area, you pick it up, you go in and do a quick measurement. The microphones on our cell phones now are pretty close to what you would get on a calibrated unit. In my finding, it's not something you want to, it's not an official, documentable result, but it gives you an idea of what you may be dealing with in terms of potential hazardous noise area. If that area is over 85 decibels, with that preliminary reading, you want to go the next step. You want to go into what's called personal noise dosimetry. So we have the wand, which is your area meter, and then you have a personal noise dosimeter, which again, you guys should be familiar with. And we use what's called the 3M Edge 5. That's kind of the latest and greatest. It's a shoulder-mounted device that is smaller than a cell phone, and the nice thing about it is the microphone is actually mounted onto the unit. So the old DL units and if you go back far enough, the old 300s that had the cord that you had to run up someone's back, and then the engineers moving around and yank it, and then you lose all of your data. Those days are pretty much gone. So the devices are nice and small and pretty easy to use as far as running a unit at yourself, but also being able to actually document in nice user friendly programs that are out there as well. What we're looking to achieve when we do a noise assessment is a nice comprehensive exposure assessment. Again, when we're doing that, we want to do a pretty good strategic planning. That always starts with a pre-assessment walkthrough evaluation. And what that does is it gives you a familiarity, or the technician or industrial hygienist that's going to be doing the noise assessment is to be able to walk through the particular area that we're going to assess, and to also be able to pick up on things that, you know, the fresh eyes perspective, to be able to pick up on other areas that maybe were not discovered during that safety manager's walkthrough. So we want to take that walkthrough. We want to be able to identify the particular skill sets that may be affected. Also, you want to make sure that if there's any noise that's bleeding over into administrative areas, that we don't forget that those folks may be not the ones producing the noise, but in earshot of that hazardous noise. And therefore, you want to make sure that you want to include their area, at least, if not them personally, in that assessment. Again, I can't stress it enough, communicate. Walking around and doing your pre-assessment walkthrough evaluation gives you the opportunity to introduce the technician, to introduce the workers that are going to be participants in this noise assessment. Oftentimes, and my experience is, we'll come into an area, we've already done the walkthrough evaluation, and we've set up everything. My technician shows up, and those that are needed to gather the data don't even know that they've been pegged for a noise assessment. That's never good, especially for my technician who they've never seen. And you can imagine the response when they're told, hey, I'm going to stick this device on you that's going to record. And of course, it's not recording their voices, but to them, you really do have me under surveillance. So we need to be very forthright and proactive in communicating with those that we are needing to participate in order to get a comprehensive assessment. So with that walkthrough, that's an opportunity, again, to get some information from those guys that are on the ground that we're actually going to be assessing. A lot of times they know areas and other things that may need to be surveilled and assessed. And so it's good to talk to them. It allows you to do some mapping. So we're all familiar with the mapping, where we can get a preliminary shot of the noise area, and then back out slowly and mark off the area where that surrounding area is no longer at 85 plus. Okay, so that's important, and that gets into, we'll get into in a moment with the signing, putting up signage and such. So to get a good comprehensive assessment, we want to make sure that we're getting a minimum of 10% of the representative skill set in that particular area that we're surveilling. So for instance, if there's a mechanical shop and there's 20 people in that area, you don't want to be testing one person, because you're going to miss. If there's that many people in a shop, then there's a wide enough area that you need to get a good swath of and variance of noise exposures. That makes sense? Again, we need to make sure we're communicating. Okay, we're communicating with those folks on the front end during the assessment. So our industrial hygienist during the assessment is going to be walking around and doing interviews with those workers. Again, we're gathering information. What are you doing? Where are the the highest levels of noise. So peeking out those areas that may have not been caught on the initial walkthrough. Picking up any concerns. You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how much information we get as a visitor from the team members, the employees, that they would not pass on to you because they feel like there's some type of repercussion involved. So we can kind of be your mole in that way as well, and bring up issues that could prevent in the future some form of complaint around you to OSHA, and then they show up at your door, and that's the first you're hearing about it. So that's another benefit. And I won't go into the actual process of the noise assessment. What I want to hit on, and if you're interested in that, we have actually a white paper. So our technician comes in, he introduces himself, he brings those folks that are going to wear the noise dosimeters in. He explains the process. And additionally, we have a white paper or a talking paper that we hand to them so that they, ahead of time, so that they can read. Most people, like I said, they think that it's recording their voice, and I got to be careful what I say during this time. And as we all know, it just records decibel level. So that kind of puts the worker at ease, and they can go about their normal day without any issues. It's imperative that the findings, the recommendations, and the implementations based on those findings and recommendations are conveyed to the worker. Again, most times we do the noise assessment as well as we do the testing and training. We come in and the worker is asking us, what's going on? Why do I need to be tested? What's our noise exposure levels, and so on and so forth. That tells me that there's no pass down of this process to the very people that are impacted. That's never good. Okay, so part of the recommendations with that is going to be signage. I put that in my notes after the fact, but part of implementing a program is not only putting in place the testing, the training and such, it is also putting up signage. And we generally will work with you on doing that, putting up the appropriate signage so anyone that walks into that area, of course, we should have already notified the workers in that area, but what about visitors? What about the big bosses who generally don't come down into that area? We need appropriate signage ahead of time so that they're aware. And to remind the workers, of course, as well. Talk just briefly on engineering and administrative controls. So as I'm talking, if there's any questions or anything you want to throw out, please do. I don't want this to be. I told Jason Russell yesterday, my monotone voice will put you to sleep. So I want you to speak up at will. This isn't formal. We're all colleagues. So engineering controls. That is always the first step in approaching a noise situation, a hazardous noise situation. In other words, is there something I can do other than going straight to a hearing conservation program to abate that noise? So can I get my mechanical team or mechanics team to tighten down some of the equipment to kill some of the noise? Maybe some belts need to be tightened. Maybe we can place some sound dampening equipment in the area, flooring, curtains, those kind of things in place. Now, the downside to that is some of this is going to be quite costly. So, you know, as far as sound dampening equipment, some of that stuff can be costly and would deter you from going that route. So, and the other downside is it may not actually achieve the abatement to the level that's going to negate the need for a program. So that's just things to consider, but per OSHA guidelines, that's always the first step. You want to look at how can we engineer out this noise, okay? The next step is administrative controls. So once that noise is measured, you're going to get what's called a time-weighted average. So it's based on an 8-hour, sometimes 10-hour or 12-hour, depending on the length of that work shift. And that time-weighted average for 8 hours would be 85 decibels or a dosage of 50%. So I won't get into all that. You guys are, that's something we sit down after the fact and go through in detail with you. So, with that 85 decibels of exposure, that administrative control, you can take that time-weighted average, and I don't want to get too much into weeds and sticks, and determine a length of time a particular skilled worker can work in that area to minimize their exposure time and therefore their exposure overall, and that would bring their time-weighted average below the 85 decibels possibly, but will definitely minimize their exposure. But with that, it takes oversight and management to make sure that that's happening. So that generally gets pushed aside. So so what generally happens is there's a leapfrog over the engineering and administrative controls options, if you will, onto the hearing conservation program. So pretty much they say, come in and do your noise measurements, and we're going for the hearing conservation program, which generally, excuse me, generally will be something you can touch and feel to see the effectiveness of your program versus going those other two routes that may be costly or cost you doubling up your staff in order to minimize their exposure time. And it may be more beneficial and easier to assess the effectiveness of the overall program and your employees. So once we've done we've done the noise assessment, and forgive me, I'm getting used to this talking to a computer thing, but
hey Fred.
Yes, sir.
Fred, it's Russell. Yes. So we had before we leave measurement and dosimetry, we had a question from the chat feature. Dale asked, so do you use an octave band analyzer oh wait, let me quote him verbatim. Where did it go? Do you use an octave band analyzer to evaluate the noise source for corrective action? And you could weigh in on. Or
go ahead. Say again.
Yeah, if you want to weigh in on octave band analyzers. It's news to me. I can learn.
Say that one more time.
Hey, Dale, why don't you chime in?
Can you hear me?
Yep, there you go.
Yes. Hi, Dale.
Right. Hello. Yeah, one of the tools on a sound level meter is get an octave band analyzer to assess the particular frequencies that are contributing most to the noise in a work area. Do you guys do octoband analysis of noise sources in work areas to try to pinpoint where, because sometimes it's one little piece of machinery or one little area where the noise is most effective. And if you address that particular area, that can really reduce the overall noise. So do you guys go out and do octoband analysis of noise in areas to be able to assess for that?
We generally do not get into that aspect of it, Dale. In some cases, we will actually refer out to acoustical engineers when we get into that aspect of pinpointing, you know, or getting that much in depth into that. We stay pretty simplified in doing the actual noise assessment with the use of the Edge 5 noise dosimeters. We don't even use the area meters at all, because generally we can accomplish the same thing with the state-of-the-art Edge 5s. So to answer your question, we don't really delve that far into it in respect to the octoband analyzers.
This is Gail Brandis. Bob and I have used octave bands quite a lot. Can we chime in?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, we find that the regular sound level meters, as you all know, are dBA, and they are geared towards what people hear, and the standards are geared towards what is most damaging to the human ear.
Yes, ma'am.
Where dBC, the octave band analyzer, gives you dBc, which is actual sound pressure levels.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are looking at noise sources and trying to find ways to mitigate those, we find it better to use the dBc yardstick, because that tells us what the actual sound pressure is. And that will work better with the sound absorbing materials that we would be prescribing. Does that make sense?
Now, Gail, you use DBC is not linear, and that's not octoband analysis. Are you saying that you're just, because I mean, if you're in a low noise environment with a lot of low, frequency noise, the boom boom type stuff, if you switch your sound level meter from A to C, it'll go way up. Simply because it's eliminating all of that low noise. So you're saying that, so basically using the C would really just tell you, is there a lot of low frequency noise present in the environment? Isn't that correct?
The issue is, if you're trying to track down a noise problem, you want to have your instrument more sensitive. And if you do an analysis on a dBA scale and a dBc scale, and of course easily see up front is low frequencies a major portion of the noise source or not. And in many cases, what people always complain about are the low frequencies, because they travel right into their homes, while the walls easily stop high frequencies. But the bigger question I have is, what noise standards do you apply in Nevada? Because,
I can answer.
The noise source, it's bugging people and they're complaining about it, but is it against the law? How do you do an enforcement action against somebody who is creating a lot of noise if you have no standards or legal standing to comply?
I can answer that question because I've done lots of environmental noise. We're getting out of the occupational into environmental with this, but just for your information, Bob, is most of the jurisdictions around here have very poor noise standards. It's just kind of like, oh, if you hear a barking dog and you call us and we hear it, then we'll cite them, that kind of stuff. But the Clark County does implement octave band analysis on noise. And I have found that unless you're going out in the middle of the desert, you cannot comply with that standard. It's extremely stringent. So there is a standard, and it is in the Clark County codes.
Do you know where Clark County got it from?
Yes, it, I think it was an old ANSI thing, and it's old. I know that, and I forget exactly where, but it's one of the organizations for environmental noise that they got it from. But yeah, I've used it numerous times for environmental noise. But anyhow, sorry for getting off track. I just need to get back to the occupational stuff because environmental is a whole other world.
Not a
It's
problem
good
at
stuff.
all. This is crosstalk, so if the information is enriching, we've accomplished it. So we've accomplished something. So we're okay with that.
Fred,
Yes, sir.
what you want, well, if you wouldn't point out that the documentation of that, I'm going to call it aerial surveillance post, your walk around is very important for court cases. If you're going to end up with a court case or a hearing conservation issue, because if you get a hearing loss and it becomes compensation, you buying hearing aids for that person the rest of their lives.
Yes, I will go ahead and touch on that. As a matter of fact, that's next after the testing. But let me do this. Let me touch briefly on the testing. Everyone's familiar with the testing portion, so I just want to pinpoint that, and it'll tie into what you're talking about, Sam. So, so we're familiar with once we've gotten our data, we've got an 85 plus assessment or a 50% dosage. When we say 50% dosage, what we're doing is calculating
Just so basic.
the real time. So some places like maybe a lounge might be only open for 5 hours. So we're only going to get 5 hours of data. So that's going to be calculated into an 8-hour time-weighted average, but what's called the L average is going to give us the actual decibel average reading. If that average decibel reading is over 85 decibels, 85 decibels is the threshold that equals 50% dose. And that, even though, let's say that 8-hour time-weighted average resulted in 84 decibels below that action level, it's still going to, by the L average or the real-time monitoring, is going to push over 50%, and that would still identify that person as needing to be on a hearing conservation program. Does that make sense? And this is stuff that we generally do with an after-action meeting to sit down and walk through the formal reporting that we put together and walk through and clarify and justify those findings and recommendations. So, so does someone chime in?
Fred, this is Russell. I'll chime in. Maybe you can decide where this fits in your discussion layout. I find that, so in my exposure, it's in work comp, walking job sites and facilities for a whole range of employers, both GI and construction, I find that my most challenging exposures to start to engage the employer are construction, because it's so dynamic. It's so here and there, and it's really loud for a bit, but then there's a different task and it's not. So maybe at some point, if you could share some best practices for engaging construction employers with effective identification and control of occupational noise.
Okay. I'll do that. Remind me as I get into the hearing protection, and then I'm going to address Sam's question, and then I'll tie in yours.
Okay,
here.
perfect.
So remind me when
Thank
I get
you.
to that point. Okay. So we've identified an 85 plus exposure with maybe one or multiple skill sets in the assessed areas. And now with that, we've looked at engineering the noise out. That's not a route to go most cases because it's going to be too expensive, truth be told. And then the administrative controls requires extra personnel and another oversight for the managers, and generally that goes out the window rather quickly. And so the third one is the implementation of a program. So that baseline program requires annual testing and training. I want to stop real quick and talk about training. Training is the core of any safety surveillance program. What often happens is we focus on the hearing test, but I always use the analogy of, let's make this a respirator issue. We're never going to hand over that respirator without fitting and proper training and briefing on what you're dealing with the hazardous chemical and so on. We would never just hand that person a respirator and send them on their way. But in this industry, as far as hearing conservation goes, we often focus on the hearing test, and the employee generally starts to become desensitized to the importance of the program, because we do the hearing test, we send them on their way, everything looks good, and we don't take the time to educate and train them on the overall intent of and scope of the program. So that's super important, particularly on your baseline, that you make those employees aware of why are we doing this, and it's all about protecting you from the hazards in your area. Okay, so that training is super important. So when it comes to new hires, we want to make sure that those new hires, OSHA says they have to be tested and trained within 6 months of their initial exposure. And that's okay. They must be trained on the effective use of hearing protection before you put them out there into harm's way. However, because of what Sam referred to earlier, we often run into issues where you get an employee that spends as little as 2-3 months at a workplace, and the employer is deciding to wait that 6 months to test them to get their baseline. So we've just bought on a possible liability, not knowing the status of that new worker. So this guy walks away, guy or gal walks away 3 months after they've been hired. We don't know their auditory status, and 2 months later, you get a summons for a court case because this guy has significant hearing loss, and he's claiming that it was incurred under you guys' watch. So our recommendation is always to make that baseline testing and training as part of your orientation process, as part of your hiring process, just like they go get their drug test and everything else, that you are assessing the status of that person. So if they leave and in that 3-month window, you have clear exhibit A that loss that was pre-existing was not on your watch, and you're not liable for it. So the cost of a hearing test versus no evidence to stand on could be dramatically different in your cost. Okay, so that's super important with the new hires. The annual testing, and I'll move along quickly here. The annual testing, of course, we're using that baseline versus the annual for comparison. And what we're looking for is the standard threshold shift, which more clearly defined is a plus 10 decibel average loss in the mid-range frequencies, 2, 3, and 4K. Excuse me, 2, 3, and 4K frequency. So if there's an average of 10 decibels loss in comparison, that would be your standard threshold shift. And for us, OSHA gives you the option to do age correction, which is only fair. We don't want a 55-year-old guy being penalized for natural occurring hearing loss. So we use that option to calculate whether that STS exists. More importantly to that STS is the next level, as I would call it, and that's the POR, or possible OSHA recordable level hearing loss that we again get upon comparison to the baseline. That particular one, the difference is that one is a plus 10 STS plus, when you look at that annual that caused the STS, that 2, 3, and 4, those thresholds are going to average 75 decibels or higher, and that would carry you into an OSHA recordable range. Dwayne, turn your mic on. I think you're muted. I'm not hearing you, sir. And I can't sign, so. Is that something you can text to Russell, and then he can pass that on? Okay, thanks. So,
yeah, Dwayne, you might be able to, you could put it into the chat box as well. You could do that.
okay, so you have your STS and your OSHA recordable. Both those are OSHA requires within 30 days that individual gets retested. Now, remember I said there's testing and training that's mandated under this program. So not only on their baseline, but on their annual, you're going to do refresher training. You want to reiterate, you want to make sure that those individuals are properly placing their hearing protection. So, because therein lies most of the problem, improper fitting. Am I back? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yep, we're good. A hiccup, but I think we're good.
Okay, had a little internet issue there. So again, super important we follow up on these individuals, okay? So 29 CFR 1904.10 is the record keeping or the guidance for how you would follow through on an OSHA recordable, individual with the OSHA recordable. Okay, it gives you, it's set up like a question and answer. So pretty much you're going to make sure that at the point of service, when we find that shift, we're going to yet delve in with additional training for that, retraining for that individual. We're going to, again, work with them on inserting, proper insertion of that hearing protection, and to make sure if that's the issue, that's resolved. The other part of that is an otoscopic check. So often what happens is the individual comes in, they get a shift, We have them do the 30-day, within 30 days return. They show as a consistent shift. And then after that, OSHA requires that they get a clinical evaluation to rule out, is this a work-related change, or could this be an underlying medical condition that's causing the loss? In other words, is this work-related, or is this a clinical issue? If it's work-related, then, well, let me back up. The point I was going to make was, if we don't do an otoscopic check at our level, we're going to run this employee through a process that may wind up being something as simple as impacted wax, and we've just cost the company probably close to $1,000 for an audiologist or ENT to tell this individual, oh, here's your problem, you have impacted wax, flush your ears, and we're back to normal. So super important, whether you're in the midst of that process with your company that does that technician is in fact doing an otoscopic check, particularly with anyone they're identifying with a STS or OSHA recordable shift. Okay.
So Fred, kind of
Yes.
in that vein, the question that I got from Dwayne is kind of up this alley, and his question was: in a legal situation, does OSHA or MSHA take individuals' lifestyle into consideration regarding
Yes.
hearing loss, such
That's
as
very
shooting
good.
or other loud recreational activities?
Yes, and that is part of that clinical evaluation and the work relatedness determination. So I actually have, and maybe I'll get a roster and some contact information from you, Russell,
Sure.
and I will
Sure.
send to you guys. I actually have it's from the National Hearing Conservation Association, and it's titled Guidelines for Recording Hearing Loss on the 300 Log. But it goes into depth, the employer and that clinical evaluator relationship, if you will, and the importance of conveying to that provider what you're after. And there's generally, on our test questionnaire, with each test, we ask those particular questions. And you're aware, Russell, we ask about, do you use firearms? Do you use any type of heavy machinery, ATV, motorcycle use, so on and so forth? So are there any off-duty habits that are going to be attributed to this hearing loss that we've found? So
Right.
that's part of the work relatedness determination that provider would be making. Now, the bad news is, if that particular type of habit, off-duty habits, are an attributing factor, but you cannot negate that another attributing factor is in fact the workplace, then you own it all. So that's kind of the downside of it, and it's super hard to battle or weigh out the 60% versus 40% on duty, off duty. That's kind of a tough one to crack. So that documentation helps you with that test questionnaire, and we do pass that on to the employer, and that questionnaire does in fact have that individual signature on it saying, yes, I admit it, this is my off-duty hazardous noise exposures. So that may help you internally.
It's left to the discretion of the hearing officer on those issues.
Yes, sir. And when it comes back to the employer, it's a good idea to have a quote unquote working group that involves your safety, your risk manager, and your workman's comp, if they're not all the same person. In some cases they are, but it's a good working group, because what happens is, let's say that person does come back for their retest and has a consistent change. At that point, 1904.10 says you can enter that person onto your OSHA 300 log, or if you're MSHA, the 7000-1, you can enter that person onto that OSHA 300 log at that time, or you can wait until that clinical evaluation is done, because that provider could very well make it not work related, which means they don't need to be on that 300 log.
Well, just remember, compensation and OSHA may be the same or may be different too.
Yes. So that to my next point, not every case is going to be workman's comp. That's the importance of having that working group. That working group can sit down and look at all of that information. We're going to provide you with their test history. We're going to provide you with their audiometric history, the information they gave us in terms of their off-duty habits, any traumatic events that might attribute to that hearing loss. All of that information your team, that employment team, will have, and then that fourth person on that working group is going to be your general counsel to determine whether this is a legitimate workman's comp case, or is this something we're going to push back on. So not every case, in my estimation, should flow directly to workman's comp. That's just too passive of a route to allow to be taken, because some people will purposely, unfortunately, go that avenue to get that compensation. So that's just something to be mindful of. Sam, you had a question on the litigation, or did that answer your question as far as?
It pretty much answered the question, other than you might want to talk about qualifications for taking that engineering sound study after you've done your original walk around. Because if it goes to a court case, and only if it goes to a court case, they're going to challenge the qualifications of the engineering sound study.
Yes.
Safety guy can't do it.
Well, are you in a better place if you have an industrial hygienist that is quote unquote qualified to do it? No offense, I've met I know a lot of industrial hygienists, and there's a few actual certified, nationally certified guys. Those are our gurus of the IH community, but running that noise dosimeter is a challenge for some of them. They just don't dabble in that area of expertise. So as what I would say to that is it going to be helpful to have those credentials? Yes, always. But more importantly is, did that industrial hygienist or did that technician, because I don't know if you guys are aware, OSHA actually offers a noise measurements tutorial. It's actually a distance learning program, and they actually give you an accreditation, and you could as a KOC technician can go out and do noise assessments. The X factor is, do I have an annual calibration? Is my equipment up to date? Did I do a documented pre and post calibration? Did I do everything to the letter? And that's more the key. So everything that we do is documented from beginning to end. And as a matter of fact, I mentioned earlier with the user-friendly programs out there, it documents everything onto the unit. And then of course we're going to correlate in our formal report exactly what we're doing during the course of that. So we've in 1991, what's that, 20, oh, that's 30, I'm not a mathematician, but you know, since 1991, we've not run into that issue in the courtroom or otherwise, because our ducks have all been in a row. So, you know, what you said is preferable, but not necessarily mandated, if you will.
Well, you're 100% right. I mean, just as a safety guy, you can do the sound study and make a determination. But if you end up, unfortunately, many times you end up in a workman's comp case, which is basically becomes a court case, or they bring in one of those TV lawyers, where certification of the engineering sound test becomes an issue, and it's moved well beyond safety management. It's moved into legal management, but you need to walk the fine line. That's
Yes.
just like if you hand out, and you didn't say it this way, but you said it, you hand out earplugs like they're lollipops, and you do no sound study and they have no backup, you're headed for trouble because you've already admitted you got a sound problem and have no documentation. And
Yes, sir.
employees that complain, you need to do a sound study to see if they're legit and
Exactly.
ease their anxiety. And basically, you should have a safety committee. And if that comes to the safety committee, you need to work it. And the best way is to get an expert in there and not leave it to yourself. You know, get an independent person in there.
Yes, 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 absolutely.
This is Dale Walsh again.
Yes, Dale.
I have a comment and a question. Comment is the two words industrial hygienist. I'm a certified industrial hygienist.
Yes,
And I really hate it when people call themselves industrial hygienists. Frankly,
yes, sir.
unless you have a master's degree in industrial hygiene or you are a certified industrial hygienist, you shouldn't call yourself an industrial hygienist because so many people, especially in the mold and asbestos industry, like to call themselves hygienists. They don't have a clue about industrial hygiene. And
Yes.
it wouldn't surprise me that they wouldn't have a clue how to operate a noise dosimeter. The question I have is, do you also evaluate the noise using the ACGIH TLV criteria, which is a lot more stringent than OSHA? And frankly, in a court case, if I was on the other side, the OSHA 85 and 90 is not very protective of hearing loss. And the ACGIH TLV is, I find it all the time where you pass on the OSHA criteria, but you fail on the ACGIH criteria. So do you report that as well?
Yes, sir. Actually, we with the and you're familiar with the Edge 5s, we actually record all the entire gambit. It gives you everything from OSHA to MSHA to the to that standard as well. It prints everything out. Most of the folks that we deal with, to be honest, they're not that technically involved with that level, but some places do have, let's say, corporate level industrial hygienists that will come in, and so we want to make sure that they have that data available to them, and then they can advise based on that information onto maybe more stringent safety practices within that location.
Well, one thing I want to note too, from a liability point of view, is, I don't know, it's been quite a while now that OSHA published what they called an annotated permissible exposure limits, where they basically said our PELs are over 50 years old. They're probably not protective of worker health and safety. As such, you need to look at other guidelines out there. And then they reference 3 in particular. They reference California OSHA. They reference NIOSH recommended exposure limits, and lastly they do the ACGIH TLVs. So basically, you know, in a court case, if I was on the other side from a liability point of view of causing some damage to an employee, if they're not complying with the ACGIH TLV, you basically can say, hey, OSHA admitted that their PELs are not protective, and you should have known that, and you should have complied with the these other criteria that were out there. Just as a note that that's just a potential. Most people, like you said, only care about OSHA, but you really got to keep it in consideration, especially since OSHA admitted their own PELs are not protective, that these things need to be kept in mind.
Yes, sir. That's very good input. I actually have a table that breaks down best practices, and you may have seen it for OSHA, MSHA, Railroad, NIOSH, National Hearing Conservation Association, and I can get that out to you guys as well if you just inbox me. Let me give you my email. It's service@soundmanagement, spelled out, service@soundmanagement.biz, like biz.
Cool. That's great.
So you can forward any questions, and I'll put together some of this stuff and get it out to you. Since I starved you of the slides today.
No, that's good. We covered a lot of ground.
Yes, I had one last thing here, and it's often overlooked, and that is what's called otoxicity. You guys may be familiar with that. There are certain in industrial environments and some environments where there's labs and such, there's certain chemicals that, if we're not careful, can get into our ear gate. Particularly, let's say an engine mechanic. Particularly the old school guys, they generally don't wear anything on their hands. They get these solvents and things on their hands, and then without washing their hands, they roll down that plug and they stick it in their ear. Some of the chemicals that are out there are considered or deemed ototoxic. Oto ear, toxic, right? So, so there's actually, and I'll put it up on the screen here, OSHA just put this out. Before OSHA put it out, the Army had this document that they put out with a list of ototoxic chemicals. And it also briefs on the effects of those particular chemicals on hearing. So it's not just noise that can be a problem. You can also have a hearing loss that can be attributed to that type of exposure. So I can forward this out to you guys. Once again, it is on the OSHA website, and it's good to look at if you have those type of skill sets in your particular companies. You want to make sure that at least once a year that they're reviewing that list of items that they're exposed to alongside of their SDS to ensure that they understand how to handle that particular chemical and also how to appropriately keep themselves from exposing that chemical into the ear gate and possibly causing some hearing loss. Okay, so that's one that generally gets overlooked with the hearing conservation program, and it's super important. And the last thing I'll cover is the hearing protection. Okay, so once we've gotten our findings, our time-weighted averages on our noise assessments, those time-weighted averages are the determining factor on what hearing protection noise reduction rating that you're going to now be distributing and stocking in those particular areas. So without busying this up, if you could simply Google, if you're not familiar with it, Google noise reduction or NRR calculation. And it will give you the breakdown on how, and we generally do that on our formal reporting. We'll tell you based on the findings, what is the appropriate noise reduction rating to be used by that particular skill set based on the time-weighted averages that we found on the noise assessment. What oftentimes happens is, one of you alluded to a moment ago, the management will simply say, oh, we have a noisy area. They'll go out and buy earplugs. And when asked, what do you need? Well, give me the highest rated plug you have, with the mindset that this is going to be the best for that team member. Well, the problem with that is if I'm dealing with a 93 decibel time-weighted average and I get a 33 decibel earplug for that person, if you do the simple math, I've just reduced their hearing acuity way down to a level that's going to be challenging in a noisy environment. And so what we can do is we can compromise that individual, their decision on whether they're going to wear hearing protection or not, because we thought we were helping them. And we did protect them in this case, but we overprotected them. And now the frustration they have in not being able to communicate is going to cause them possibly to not wear the hearing protection altogether. So we've kind of defeated the purpose. So it's super important to tie in that time-weighted average to the appropriate noise reduction earplug. Okay, and then just real quick back to the ototoxicity. So we know we have the roll down style plugs. Those, they're fine, but in an industrial environment, what we generally recommend as a priority in an earplug is a push to fit style plug. So simply put, it's the plugs with the small stem, and their insertion, there's no roll down, so that individual is not actually placing whatever's on their hands onto the plug. So that push to fit is out there primarily for those type of industries where the individual can infect themselves, if you will, with a solvent or corrosive that shouldn't be placed in their ear in the first place. So that's a push to fit style. Those are your pods, and there's like skull screws, all kind of fancy names out there. And some are reusable, some are rubber reusable, some are foam. The insertion portion is foam, and those are your disposable ones. So just kind of throwing these things out there at you to keep in mind that we're not just kind of staying in the box of noise, plugs, and we're good to go. Okay. And then the last thing I want to talk about is in the line of hearing protection are earmuffs. So for years and years and years, for those who don't know, I'm retired Air Force, and this was my field: aerospace medicine, flight medicine, occupational medicine, and then also we were the OSHA inspectors, if you will, for our installations. Earmuffs. There's a difference between earplugs and earmuffs. There's a reason why the two exist. Earplugs are for the obvious. It's a filter. That's the noise reduction rating. It's a filter to bring your exposure level below the hazardous level of 85 decibels, and it requires a complete seal. Otherwise, just like a respirator with a leak, that's no good. So we want to make sure that with the plug, there's a complete seal. Okay, that's the emphasis on a plug, proper fitting, right? With an earmuff, if you research it, look it up online, you can look up dual protection calculation or double protection, and it'll give you a calculation. And this is a scientific calculation, and it's in OSHA reg as well. You're only gaining about 5 decibels of sound protection with an earmuff, not what the manufacturer is telling you the noise reduction rating is. The reason that manufacturer's noise reduction rating is on the box is because they've done that under perfect lab conditions in order to gain that level of protection. But that is not our protection. Okay, so with an earmuff, the reason that we don't recommend that you wear it by itself is because, remember, the seal. That's the X factor with an earplug. With an earmuff that is not custom built for us, we're taking it generically off of a shelf. It's going to leave a natural gapping or a leak right in your jawline. So that alone compromises your seal, and therefore you're not adequately protected from whatever the noise in the form of a sound wave is doing. That makes sense? So
Yeah.
that gap there compromises the efficiency of that muff versus what you would get in the form of a properly fitted earplug. Okay?
Excellent.
So with an earmuff, that earmuff, it deals primarily with vibration or contact noise. So stay with me for a second, because I mess with people when I share this. So think of when you put an earmuff on your head. An earmuff goes on, your plugs are in, because that plug is dealing with a sound wave, right? So that energy or that sound wave, we walk into a central plant area, let's say. There's a generator 50 feet away from you that's sending a sound wave. The intensity or decibel of that sound wave is creating a loud enough decibel that at the entry control, you're going to need to put in earplugs. However, the intensity is not powerful enough that you can, quote unquote, feel the noise, right? So the closer I move to that generator, the intensity and the decibel level, common sense, is going to increase. And in some cases, if I get close enough, excuse me, to that generator, I'm going to be close enough to actually feel the intensity. So that noise we consider contact noise exposure. No different than off duty if I'm using a firearm. That energy or recoil from the firearm, that is also noise. As a matter of fact, it is the noise. Think about it. Where's the sound wave emanating from? That which is vibrating. So that energy I'm now touching, and its route is different than the sound wave itself. The sound wave is going at my ear gate, and I have that taken care of with the filter of my earplug, totally sealed. The vibration is entering my body. If it's an area, it's going to enter through my torso. If it's a firearm or a hammer drill or something along those lines, that energy is tingling and traveling up my arm. All right? So that energy is going to wind up tracking through your body and then creating what we all call a bone conduction response off of your skull. That ping, if you will. No different than what happens when you're chewing on some peanuts. That's why you get that echo or amplification in your head. Sounds louder, chewing those peanuts. So that bone conduction response from that hazardous noise that traveled across your body is going to ping off your skull, and it's going to fire at those same hair cells within the cochlea as the sound wave is looking to do. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So back to the earmuffs. Why are they called earmuffs? I'm going to put those muffs on my head, over my ears, but where is the compression of those cushions? Not on my ears, on my skull. So my earmuffs, the tension of those earmuffs and the effectiveness of those cushions are actually compressing my skull. And when that energy comes up to ping off of my skull, that noise is dampened or muffled, thus the name earmuffs. It's going to dampen that energy. And like Dale said, I don't know if he's still on, but he said earlier, it's going to bring that high frequency ping off of your skull down to a lower frequency. That's the engineering of what an earmuff is supposed to do. So the double protection is mainly, and it's generally not explained this way. This is information I got in the Air Force through Air Force Research Lab, and that's how earmuffs are actually engineered to work. So it's a dampening based on the tension and the cushions and the compression against your skull. So that's why the earmuffs are there as a secondary. So OSHA requires 100 decibels, not requires, they recommend at 100 decibels that you place double protection. OSHA's it's a recommendation. MSHAR requires or mandates it for 105 decibels. And if you check it, that threshold is generally where close proximity, where you're going to feel vibration. So they kind of word it from that angle, just based on the decibels, but your vibration and proximity generally, it correlates with the vibration exposure. So think of a firearm, obviously 120 to 140 decibels, depending on what you're firing. So that's kind of the gist of what you want to be conveying when you're thinking of your guys wearing double protection. So plugs for sound, muffs for vibration. If I'm getting both noise exposures, I wear both because of the two exposures. That's my double protection equation. Does that help?
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. So it's generally not trained or conveyed this way. It's usually conveyed in the decibels. OSHA says 100 decibels. We recommend you double up. They don't mandate it, OSHA. MSHA mandates it at 105 decibels for that reason. So even our governing bodies for compliance, if you will, they could better word what they're after and the justification behind doing particularly the double protection. And that would help out quite a bit. So, and even with the noise canceling earmuffs, same thing. The gap is still there. The technology is great, but with that gap there and dealing with that range of noise, 120 to 170, you're playing with fire, just wearing those noise canceling muffs and not having plugs in on top. Okay. So, and at the firing ranges as well, you want to be careful. They issue you earmuffs when you go for your CCW. Make sure you're taking earplugs with you to go underneath those muffs. Okay. I know we're way over. I wanna make sure that if there are any brief questions or anything, I don't know what you guys' timeline is. We can answer those, and then, like I said, you can email me, and I will certainly pass on any of this information or point you to the resources online to pull in this information.
Yep, that sounds great. I've got a 10 o'clock phone call I have to make, and since the room.
I think, Russell, we lost you.
Yeah, he's frozen in time.
Let's see if he's going to come back on. Okay, I think not. So for those who are able to join us today, we want to thank you. We know we had some technical difficulties that had us join late. And if you hung in there because you joined late, we also ended late. And also want to thank Fred for your vast wealth of brain knowledge that comes spewing out. And for those of you, we're going to call it officially adjourned at 9:48 a.m. And thank